Dr. J.
Welcome to the final installment of Community Conversations for the 2025-2026 school year. We hope you find something of value to you in our presentation tonight. I'll mention that this April installment is the swan song for our outgoing superintendent of schools, Dr. Benita Jameson. She, of course, was the brainchild, the creator, the founder of this community engagement series, which has served us well for several years now. So we're going to begin with her, and then we'll move on to our Director of Student Services, Mr. Vince Estrada, and then our facilitators from Safe Connections. Dr. Jameson, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Ed, and thank you for those kind words. Community conversations, as you mentioned, were developed to engage our families in meaningful dialogue around topics that were important to them. And I know while these sessions are typically named community conversations with the superintendent and district leadership, they are not solely led by me. It just means that I'm present, I'm here to support, but it also means that this is a partnership and we bring in partners when necessary. But it also gives us an opportunity to collaborate with partners within the community with whom we already have partnerships and also allow them to lead the discussions because they do have the level of expertise based on what we're bringing forward to community. So I am excited to have everyone here tonight and looking forward to hearing the presentation from Safe Connections.
Thank you, Dr. Jameson. Hey, good evening, everyone. This is Vince Estrada, Director of Student Services for Maple Richmond Heights. The community conversations has been one of my favorite activities to engage in over the course of the year. It's relaxed and it's collaborative and it's a different way of connecting with our families and community members. Dr. Jameson's always got her ear out for topics, and she had a conversation with a student at the high school recently. And that student was expressing a need and interest in learning or having more information available to parents and students and families around healthy boundaries and consent and safe relationships. And Dr. Jameson said, I got a topic for our April meeting. And the minute she said that, I thought of Safe Connections. They're current partners with MRH. They have a therapist that comes to our school once a week to work with our students. They have a long-standing, excellent reputation around trauma-informed practices. And this particular topic, and they developed a curriculum to support work and learning in this area. And in fact, sort of a fun fact, their Project Heart curriculum, which is 30 plus years old, I had an old copy of it because I was a facilitator many years ago with Progressive Youth Center, and we used that curriculum. That's much improved, and I'm rusty on the skills. So I was happy to reach out to Safe Connections, and they were so gracious to agree to kind of join us tonight. So I'm looking forward to hearing her presentation, and I'll let the Safe Connections staff introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amarian Green, and I am a Project Heart facilitator, educator with Safe Connections. Olivia, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Olivia. I'm also a Safe Connections Project Heart facilitator. Happy to be here. Before we get started, I am going to drop a quick Google Sheet sign in. Quick and easy. You guys can take a minute, do it now or do it at the end, whatever works for you.
Thank you so much, Olivia. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen. Actually, before I do that, just a little bit more about Safe Connections. We got a wonderful introduction from Vince. Thank you so much from that. Safe Connections, we are a domestic violence prevention agency. And so, in short, what that means is that we believe that everyone is entitled to relationships that are happy, healthy, and safe. If you don't have relationships that are happy, healthy, and safe in whatever way, we have support systems available to you. The number one support system is our crisis intervention hotline or our helpline. That number is going to be found on our presentation once we get into that. It's 314-531-2003. That number is available 24/7, 7 days a week. You can call or text it. And our main goal is to help you out through any type of relationship issues, any type of conflict, any type of trauma things that you may need to talk with someone about. And again, that's open 24/7. We also offer therapy services, and what me and Olivia do here as far as education services and the community education services as well, offer within our departments at Safe Connection. So Very interesting topic today, talking about healthy relationships and consent. It is definitely a deeper conversation sometimes, but it's very important. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If there's any questions from any of you all in the chat room here, please feel free to drop those in, and Olivia will go ahead and interrupt me whenever she feels ready to, if questions come about, or you can unmute your mic and go ahead and feel free to speak. I'm going to go ahead and transition and share my screen. Just give me one moment. All right, so you probably can't see me, but that's okay. Um, Here we have a little whiteboard, and I wanted to do this here because I I'm used to being in the classroom. And so here with this presentation, I wanted to bring this classroom activity to this Zoom space, this virtual space, and see how this can work a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce what this is. This is our ingredients for a healthy relationship at Safe Connections. We use an acronym called TechBarks. This acronym itself doesn't really mean much, but it's the way that we remember what I like to call all the ingredients that you need for a healthy relationship. When we talk about healthy relationships, we're not only talking about romantic relationships, but also those platonic relationships, the relationships you have with your teachers, with your students, with your family, and your coworkers as well. And so, with these characteristics that we're going to go through, each one of them represents something. Each one of them holds some type of weight in what we think and what we should be expecting within our healthy relationships. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you all want to guess any of these, feel free to leave some things in the chat, and we're going to see if you all can guess any of the acronym. We're going to start with the first one. The first letter is T. This letter here is all about being able to talk to your partner, right? We're talking about trust. Thank you, Vince. Yes, we're talking about trust, right? When we are in a healthy relationship, we should have trust. We deserve trust in those relationships. Trust can look like a lot of different things. It can look like being able to going and talking to that person about something that they did, being able to let them know what your goals are, what your biggest secret is, whatever it is that it means to you, you should have trust within those relationships. The next one is the E. Do we have any guesses for this? Empathy. Empathy is a great guess. If I had a bonus word section, I'll put it up there. The E for us is actually empathy. No, I'm just playing. It's equality. Equality is one of those things in our healthy relationships where we all deserve and we all need to be on the same playing field. Now, there's going to be some times definitely where everyone is not on the same playing field. You have those relationships that are student and teacher relationships. You have the parent and child relationships and things of that nature as well. When we talk about equality, we're talking about there's nothing that one person can do in a relationship that the other person is that the other person can't do as well. We're on the equal playing field. What love may look like to us, it may look different, but there's no quantity or measurement on what that love is, right? Because we have an equal explanation of what our relationship is. And in this relationship, we deserve all the things, right? Whatever you are deserving of, I'm deserving of as well. So when we talk about equality, we're talking about meeting each other where we are, being on the same playing field, and never having any of those power imbalances. For the C is communication. Communication is very important, right? Calm and compassion, I see those in the chat. Thank you so much for that engagement. Both of those are great words, right? We need compassion. We need to be able to be calm, right? We're going to talk about a little bit of self-awareness later, so keep that word in mind. When we're talking about communication, simply talking about having those difficult conversations. One thing that I've realized over my time working with Safe Connections and just being human in general is that sometimes healthy relationships require difficult conversations. Rather, it is holding someone accountable or setting those boundaries. And we're going to talk about those two words later. But whatever that communication is needed, however it is needed, being able to have those conversations is very important. And we're not only talking about having those conversations, but we're talking about listening. What are we doing in those conversations? We're listening. Are we listening to understand? Are we listening to respond? Most of the times, I would say we should be listening to understand, right? Communication is barely anything without that understanding piece. Next up, we have our H, which is honesty. Trust and honesty, they go hand in hand for me. I believe that you can't really have one if you don't have the other, right? And so we talk about Honesty, the ability to be honest. We all know what that means. Um, let's move on to our B. I said B earlier. Does anyone catch those limits that you might have or those walls that you might set up when you are trying to create safety in a healthy relationship? Yes, definitely, definitely. Boundaries. We're talking about those boundaries, right? So when we talk about boundaries, we're talking about walls and limits that we use in order to keep ourselves safe in our relationships. Whatever those relationships are, sometimes we need a little boundaries to let people know, like, hey, I'm not okay with this, or hey, I'm okay with this. We can do this. Everything is great here. But when I have this boundary, when I have this wall set up, I expect people, and we should expect people to respect whatever those boundaries are, right? Whether that is not touching my hair or not eating off of my plate or I don't know, just taking things from me, taking stuff off my desk. If you're at work, you have some coworkers who might be a little touchy and things of that nature, right? Those boundaries that we set up in order to keep ourselves happy, in order to keep ourselves safe in whatever environments we're in, whatever relationships we're in. And when people don't respect those boundaries, we have to hold them accountable. So our next part is accountability. When we talk about accountability, we're not only talking about holding other people accountable, but we're also talking about holding ourselves accountable as well. I believe it's um, one of those things where you can't really hold anyone else accountable if you don't practice holding yourself accountable as well. What can that look like? Becomes the question. One thing for me, I talk a lot about my goals, right? Have to be able to hold myself accountable in order to achieve my goals, right? If I say I'm going to go to the gym tonight after this meeting here, and then I don't go, what does that accountability look like for me, right? I might need some accountability, something to remind me of what my reasoning is, what my discipline has allowed me to do. The next one is respect. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, right? Whatever respect looks like and feels like to you. I'm not going to give us a broad definition of respect, but pretty much respect, right? And that respect should always be mutual. Next up, consent, the topic of the day. We're going to dive deeper into this and what this looks like, especially within our relationships at school and at work and for teenagers as well. But consent, yes is yes and no means no. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Next up, second to last, we have safety. We're talking about safety. We're talking about physical safety and emotional safety as well, right? What does this look like in a healthy relationship? Sometimes it can look like being able to tell your partner, "Hey, you did something to me that I did not like. You said something that kind of triggered me, that rubbed me the wrong way, whatever that inkling might be." Just the having the feeling of safety, the feeling of safeness with your emotions with another person within a relationship. That's what we're talking about here. Yes, we want that physical safety as well, right? No one should be putting their hands on each other. No one should be touching each other inappropriately without that consent piece. But we're also talking about our emotional safety as well. If I feel like I can't come and talk to you about something that you did to me, or talk to you about something that maybe I just have on my mind, maybe some insecurities that I'm dealing with, do I really have emotional safety here in this relationship? Those are the type of questions that we want to prompt and we want to ask. And then our last one is self-awareness. When we talk about self-awareness, we are talking about not only being aware of like our surroundings, right? A lot of the times in the classroom, the kids are always like, "Oh, you got to be aware of your surroundings." That is 100% true, but we also have to be aware of ourselves. When we talk about self-awareness, we're talking about being able to understand and know one's capacity. Let's say you have a conflict with a friend and you can feel yourself getting to that point where you're about to cuss them out. You're about to say something below the belt, say something that you might regret, right? That self-awareness piece, once we practice that, it allows us to kind of stop in our tracks and take a deep breath and figure out how we're going to respond to the situation instead of reacting to the situation. So this is Tech Box. This is all of our ingredients for a healthy relationship. Furthermore, I would even say these are our tools that we're going to use throughout the lesson today to kind of talk about consent. These are like the foundational principles that we at Safe Connections use when it comes to all of our conversations. Without these characteristics of a healthy relationship, we have to have some communication. We have to have some conversations and figure out what and where can we go, if anywhere, right? I'm gonna go stop my screen for a moment and switch over to the other PowerPoint so we can get started with talking about consent a little bit more in detail. Before I do that, are there any questions regarding the characteristics of consent or characteristics of healthy relationships? Excuse me.
Will these be operationalized and further discussed at a latter part of the event?
We definitely can if you would like to. In the classroom, we have a lot more opportunity to flesh these out and talk about them more. But any questions that y'all have about any particular ones now, we're available. I'm available to answer those, or we can come back to them after the consent conversation for sure.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Of course. Are there any other questions or comments on this portion? All right. Mhm. Okay, now we have to figure out how to share. There we go. Okay, present. Computers are not my friend sometimes, guys. All right, so so respecting relationships, building healthy connections through consent. We just finished up Tech Box. We just finished up getting some tools that we might need in order to navigate this conversation. Before we begin, I just wanted to put out there that this is a very mature conversation. It is a very vulnerable conversation sometimes as well, especially when we think about how we practice consent in our own lives, and also maybe when we learned about consent. Um, in my experience, a lot of people don't really know about consent or they don't find out about consent until later on in their livelihood, or when stuff like this happens, with Safe Connections coming and presenting at their schools or someone coming and talk to them about this thing. But I want to be able to create a space where we can talk about what does it look like to normalize conversations about consent within the classroom or within our homes at home as well. And so here, respecting relationships, building healthy connections through consent. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. We already did some introductions. We're going to skip that for now. Greatest culinary invention or worst idea ever. If anyone wants to put that in the chat for me real quick, please do. What do you think? What's your best food? The greatest culinary invention or the worst one that you've ever tasted? I think mine's is definitely pizza. Pizza and chocolate chip cookies. Never can go wrong with that. Let's go ahead and move on to the objectives and the goals of today's group. So we're going to be talking about black beans and rice and Cuban style. I like that. I might need a plate from the barbecue coming up. We're going to be talking about mandated reporting, assuming the best in people, the openness to learn, we are likely to disagree, and that's okay. So here, when we're talking about these group norms or these group goals, I want us to be able to understand what we're going into, right? And the self-care piece that we're talking about, just because someone might leave the conversation or go a little mute does not mean anything at all. Everyone should be able to take care of themselves in whatever capacity that you need during this conversation. So throughout this conversation, we're going to be talking about consent, self-reflection. What do we know? I'm going to give you all time to kind of reflect on what you already know when you learned about consent. We're going to debunk some myths regarding consent, and then we're going to dig deeper a little bit and talk about some next steps when it comes to preserving our relationships and creating and maintaining healthy relationships, especially centering conversations around consent. Again, if there's any questions at any time, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And our friend Olivia from Safe Connections will help us out with answering some of those questions. I see we have one here. When working with our youngest learners, pre-K through second grade, how would you present these principles to them? So that's a great question. We can definitely talk in detail about that towards the end. I'm going to go ahead and stab at it now as well. So at Safe Connections, we do not work with the younger individuals as much, but personally, it's one of those things where I believe some of these conversations do need to happen at some of those younger ages. I wouldn't say pre-K or second grade in particular, but that's up to the parent in that case. A lot of our programming happens within middle schools and high schools. We do have some partnerships with elementary schools as well. We work with around fifth to sixth graders, fourth, fifth, and sixth graders as well. When it comes to working with younger learners, though, there is, when it comes to working with younger learners, though, there is an adaptive version of our curriculum. When it comes to that, When we're talking about adapting curriculum to meet the audience, to meet the demographic of the people that we're working with, a lot of it comes from not the principle or not the bones of what our curriculum is and what our stance is on relationships, but it more so comes from the examples that we use, how we talk about consent, how we talk about healthy relationships. We're not going to be talking about them in romantic ways, but maybe we're talking about them in a friendly way, in a friendship, in a platonic way, right? What does this look like on the playground at recess? What does this look like in the classroom? Can I use your pencil off your desk? Can I get a sip of water out of your water bottle before just going and asking, right? And so when we talk about consent, that's actually a great segue. Thank you so much for that question. I wanted to pose this question to you all, and if you all can just drop a color in the chat, that'll be fine, or just quietly think to yourself and reflect. When you were younger, were you given information and tools around navigating and ensuring consent? How would you answer this question? I'm starting to see some responses in the chat, and a lot of them are saying orange, right? So no information. This is normal. It is crazy that it's normal, but it's normal, right? Having no information at all, having misinformation, a lot of the times comes up, not only within adult populations, but within our younger populations as well. People are not talking about this thing enough, and so there's no shame about learning what consent is, asking for information, wanting to know information about healthy relationships and what consent looks like within those healthy relationships. So we're going to skip this question for now, but I want us to be reflective here and talk and think about what do we already know about consent, if anything at all. This is something that we can discuss as well. So, if you ever talked with your kids about consent, if so, what did you talk about or share with them? Probably won't be a lot of responses here in the chat here, but it's something that I want all of us to think about. What do those conversations look like with the youth in our lives? What is a conversation around consent? How do we define it? How do we talk about it? What are some of the examples that we might give to those kindergarten or second graders, those younger people in our lives as well?
Did you want us to unmute?
Yes, please.
I mean, as an educator, you would have thought that I did a really good job talking about consent. And now that I reflect on it, I really didn't. And so my daughter, who is 21 now, has that conversation with my youngest son, 14, about what consent looks like. But when I was growing up, that wasn't a conversation or a topic that typically we discussed. It was taboo. And so I'm more aware now, but I still have not been the one to have conversation about consent. My daughter educated herself and then educated her 14-year-old brother.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting to see like the generational gaps here and the different conversations that we have or the lack thereof of those conversations when it comes to consent. And that's not something that is surprising at all. Like I said before previously, this is very normal for consent, the conversation of consent, the conversation of sex and healthy relationships, whatever that might look like for you and your communities. A lot of the times they are seen as taboo. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to like a true or false and talk about some of the myths that we see a lot when we're talking about consent. I have the participants here on the screen on the side here. If you want to use your thumbs up or thumbs down button, that's fine, or you can drop some things in the chat. But we're just going to kind of fight through these a little bit and talk about them in a little bit of detail. So the first one, true or false? Consent is just about sex. False. False. I see some of us in the chat, see some thumbs down. False, right? We're talking about consent. There's a lot of things that there's a lot of things that we talk about when we're talking about consent. We're talking about not only sexual relationships, but we're also talking about those personal boundaries. We're talking about relationships in the classroom. What does consent look like there? If you all want to drop some examples in the chat, we can definitely talk about some other things that people may need or may need to consent to within relationships. I know something that I think of is like being public or online. With this generation, a lot of us live on social media. A lot of our youth live on social media, right? And so sometimes it might need to be a conversation about, okay, is this something that we're going to do publicly? Is this something I want everyone to see our pictures and stuff, or is that something that we're going to keep to ourselves, right? And so I see in the chat consent about sharing photos, consent about sharing personal stories with others, definitely, right? A lot of times with the social media age, and also with just this generation now, people gossip, right? And so sometimes we feel like, oh, our friend tells us a story that we can go and tell the story to someone else, right? Those are conversations that we're having about consent as well, to asking that person, hey, do you mind keeping my secret? Do you mind not sharing this with someone else? That is a form of consent, as well. About entering personal space, about touching, hugs, all of those things, right? I'm glad that we brought that up, the hugs thing as well. A lot of times in the spaces that we live and work in, has become very normal, especially after the pandemic, right? And sometimes people have that boundary where they don't like to be touched. And so how can we not only place that boundary, insert that boundary, but how can we also respect it when it happens to us and we ask someone for a hug and they don't want to be touched, right? How do we respond to that? When we do respond to that, are we asking questions? Are we, I don't know, giving some pressure when it comes to the hug? Or no? We're just taking the no for what it is. We're moving on, right? Concern about discussing potentially decisive topics. Definitely, right? That's something that people don't think of all the time. A lot of the times our words can definitely trigger people. Our conversations can definitely trigger people. And so even when we're talking about discussions in the classroom, right? Sometimes it's okay to not even sometimes, it's okay to allow a student to pass a question in the class or allow a student to not really engage in that conversation. They don't have to be disruptive. They don't have to, cause whatever type of scene, right? But they can choose to opt out of that conversation because we never know what type of things this conversation might be triggering for them, right? And so that's when we practice that empathy that we were talking about a little bit earlier, one of our bonus words from Tech Barks. All right, next. Kids do not need to learn about body boundaries until high school. True or false? Yes, yes, we're gonna go false. So consent is for all ages. How their boundaries are or are not respected now can impact their future relationships. And so when we talk about this, I like to use the example, or the saying of, you teach people how to treat you every single day. If every day you are teaching someone how to treat you, if every day you are allowing this thing, this action of this person to touch you that makes you feel uncomfortable, every day you're allowing that to happen, that person might feel like it is okay for them to continue to do that, even if that thing makes you uncomfortable, right? And so when we say that you teach people how to treat us, sometimes we have to have those hard conversations about what our consent is and what it is not, about what our boundaries are and what it is not. And so it's very important for kids of all ages to learn about saying no, right? To learn about that, hey, auntie comes over, auntie hasn't seen you in a long time, and auntie wants a hug. It's okay to say no in those situations. It's been normalized, especially in a lot of our communities, to for that not to be okay, right? It's seen as a sign of disrespect not to hug the person or not to greet the person or whatever the case may be. But when we're talking about those personal spaces, we're talking about those boundaries, we're talking about consent. If a person doesn't consent, they don't consent. It doesn't matter what their age is. All right, being under the influence of a substance or intoxicated does not equal automatic consent. Excuse me, automatic consent. This is true. So even if your child does not drink or use substance, I did want to make this note. It is important to start conversations about boundaries and consent as their peers might use it, right? As students are growing up, as peers are growing up, these things are happening everywhere. These things are happening on social media. People are being influenced to do certain things. And so having these conversations about substances in our relationships is very important. About alcohol in our relationships are very important. A lot of the times people think that, like, oh, we're chilling, we had a couple beers, whatever, we're cool. Maybe this is okay. It's not always okay, right? We have to be able to check in with our partners, have conversations about what that consent looks like. And also, just to throw it out there, there's three legal entities, three times where we are protected in the state of Missouri, where you cannot give consent at all. If you are unconscious, you cannot give consent. If you are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, you legally cannot give consent. Um, and then the third one, what is the third one? Unconscious, under the influence of drugs and alcohol. And then the last
Age,
one is coercion.
age, is it age?
So age is definitely one of them. We talk about age a little bit separately, but in those three, we're talking about coercion, and we're talking about that equality piece. We're talking about manipulation, any types of power imbalances, any type of thing where someone is forcing or encouraging someone to do something that they shouldn't be doing. But age is definitely the flip side of that conversation, right? If you're 13 years old, you're a minor. You have no you can't consent to doing anything, right? And then we go up and we talk about a little bit more of those laws, right? We have the gap between 14 and 17 years of age. Where in the state of Missouri, if you are in that range of age, you can consent to having relations with someone who is 4 years older than you, which people's opinions are on their own opinions about that one, right? And then also in the state of Missouri, which we know changes from state to state, but in the state of Missouri, the age of consent is 17. Thank you for bringing that up, Vince. I think we have a couple more. So consent is always communicated verbally. What do we think about this one? True or false? So this is false. This is false. Consent is not always communicated verbally. So is there ever an instance where a yes is a no, right? I mean, if anyone in the chat wants to answer this question, feel free to go ahead. But I did want to go ahead um, and say that in situations where someone isn't able or struggling to give consent or to express however they might feel in that situation, um, it is our responsibility not to assume. Our responsibility is not to assume, but to slow down, maybe check in with that person, ask them more questions, and adjust how we ask and how we ask about consent and how we make sure that they have the true opportunity, the true opportunity to actually give consent in those situations. Right? When we talk about giving a yes, a lot of the times we're talking about that body language. We're talking about the facial expressions, the pulling in or the pulling out, right? Consent is not always communicated verbally. That is a great example. That is a great example. Thank you so much, Dr. Jameson. If a person is being threatened, they may say yes, but they may not mean it, right? So that's an extreme example, but it also happens in situations where there might be some power imbalances, or there might be some fear behind saying no, right? So we're talking about in the classroom, and we're talking about these opportunities, right? A teacher says to a student or asks them to do something, and that student might fear some type of retaliation if they don't say yes in that situation, right? We hope that that is not the case, but we never know what's going on in someone's head, right? And so that's why we practice healthy relationships because we all know how important those student-teacher relationships are to our student success. I don't have to worry about consent if I am in a relationship with them. True or false? False, definitely false. So a lot of the times we end up in situations where people think that just because we're in a relationship or just because there's some type of relationship or something has happened in the past, that that means it is okay for something to happen now, or that means that consent is just automatic for that relationship or in between those two people. That is never the case, right? You can take your consent back at any time. At Safe Connections, we talk about consent being reversible. If you say yes one moment and you decide to change your mind, whether it's in the middle of the action, before the action begins, whatever, you can change your mind in that situation, right? Just because you were in a relationship with someone does not mean that you automatically give them consent. Or just because you decided to say yes to something before does not mean that you have to say yes to something now. So when we talk about consent, it also means to talk about rejection, right? How do we tell our students, how do we tell our kids and our friends, right? Hey, you have to censor consent. You have to make sure that this is something that's important within your relationships. You have to be able to ask people before you cross their boundaries or before you cross their personal space, right? The hardest part about having this conversation is not even the initial having the conversation part, but sometimes it's the after. It's the effect of that conversation, right? We have that conversation about consent. Someone goes out and they're like, hey, whatever happens, happens. They come back to you and they're like, it did not go so well, right? I got rejected. How do we handle that rejection? It's important to talk about that. So, how could you encourage your kid to honor someone's rejection while reminding them of their own worth? Feel free to drop in the chat or to unmute your mic if you would like to share.
Mm.
Say through validating them and other strengths that they have, because sometimes one may be rejected for one thing, but they have other strengths and ways to show up in spaces that another person might not be able to.
Yeah.
100%, definitely.
The other thing that might be helpful, depending, is just depersonalizing a bit and recognizing that the person not giving you consent may have nothing to do with you, but may have more to do with their previous life experiences.
Definitely.
Um,
I love that. I love that. So
yeah.
decentering the rejection a little bit as well
Mm,
as affirming and amplifying other characteristics of that individual that stands out, right? Even if you are just amplifying or reinforcing how they asked, right? Mom, I just asked this girl out on a date with me and she said no, whatever. Okay, well, how did you ask? How did that process work, right? And once that person tells you about what's happening, then you can celebrate them for taking the no respectfully, right? It's okay to feel down. It's okay to feel, disappointed a little bit, right? But it's how we respond in those situations that matter the most. And so affirming how that person may have responded to the situation, affirming that even you asking this person for consent just shows how intelligent and how smart you are because you respect people's boundaries, right? And so being able to find different ways that you can center not just the rejection, but the reaction of that. Not just the rejection, but the action of just knowing about consent, right?
mm,
The educational piece is very important. And when we reinforce the targeted behavior, it tends to happen more.
mm,
So every person, including the youth, deserves to have connections that are filled with respect, free manipulation, and we have an opportunity to set them up for success and or reduce harm that they could cause. And for me personally, this is one of the reasons why we do the work here at Safe Connections, right? It's the main reason why our main goal is to prevent things from happening before they begin, prevent violence from happening before they begin in relationships. And so as a community, we have to think about when are we having these conversations with students? If they're not getting it a part of the curriculum at school, then when are they getting it? If they're not getting it at home, where are they getting it then, right? And a lot of times we have to think about that question that we answered at the very beginning, right? A lot of the times we don't have information about consent at very young ages. We don't have information about consent as we're growing up. But the difference between some of us here on this call, some of us, some older folks in the community and this new generation is that we have access to technology, excuse me. And so with that access to technology, there's a lot of opportunity for misinformation to be put out there. There's a lot of opportunity for people to be encouraged to think that, oh, this is a man's role in a relationship, or this is a woman's role in a relationship, or this is what consent looks like. And so sometimes we have to have those difficult conversations with our students and with our young ones in order to set them up for success. We all want our students, our little brothers, our family, anyone. We all want them to succeed. We all want them to make it somewhere. And we have to sometimes give them the tools in order to do that and to make sure that they do that in a very safe way. And they do that being a great person, being a healthy person within a relationship. So when it comes to what we should do next, embrace the awkward is number one, right? Like we were saying previously, these conversations are hard and they're up to you when you have them, right? But the only way that your student is going to get the information, the only way that your student is going to be actually informed about this, the right way, the healthiest way, one of the most safest way is for you to embrace that awkward conversation, for you to kind of take that parent hat off, that teacher hat off, and sometimes talk to a student one-on-one and check in with them, make sure that they're okay, embrace whatever that awkward moment might have been. This is another situation where I would like to give a tip for some of us who might be in situations working with students, right? And wanting to make sure that we are asking, wanting to make sure that we are checking in with those. Sometimes asking people questions out loud, it can cause a lot of anxiety, right? In front of everyone, in front of the classroom, it can be as simple as, what is your name? It could be as simple as, are you okay? Right? Sometimes going the extra mile and being intentional and calling that student in rather than calling them out in front of their peers or calling them out in the grand setting, it allows them to practice that consent a little bit more. It allows them to practice being heard and being seen within that intentional moment. And when we have healthy adults in our lives, then we expect healthy relationships as we continue to meet people and to develop and to build our identities within schools, within work, as we navigate life. Teach checking in. It goes the same way with calling in versus calling out. Teach checking in with your students, with your friendships, and all of those. When we talk about checking in, we're not just talking about, hey, are you okay? We're also talking about those situations where consent has already been given and things are starting to escalate, right? We might have said thank you. We might have said yes for one thing, but that does not necessarily mean that we said yes for everything else that you may think comes with it, right? And so when we talk about teaching checking in, we're talking about asking those questions. Hey, does this feel good? Are you okay? Are you so comfortable with this? Do you want to continue this conversation? Do you not want to continue this conversation? Whatever that might be, asking those questions, being considerate, right? We talked about tech box earlier and our characteristics of healthy relationships. And when we talk about respect, we also talk about consideration. Being able to respect your partners enough, being able to respect your friends enough to consider how they might feel, to consider how their anxiety might be twisting and turning within their stomachs, right? And that third point is know that no is not a bad thing. A lot of the times within certain spaces, people think that no is just inherently bad, right? Especially when we have jobs like teachers and when we are working with students and when we are responsible for keeping students safe and things, sometimes we believe that that no is a form of disrespect or some type of pushback. And sometimes that no is just a no. And we have to challenge ourselves to ask questions, to embrace those awkward things and make sure that our students are okay in those situations. Because just because someone says no does not necessarily mean that they are trying to be challenging. It can mean that they're probably not uncomfortable, that they're probably not comfortable, excuse me. And so embracing the awkward, teaching your students to check in and knowing that no is not a bad thing, knowing that allowing a student to pass in class when we're talking about some type of difficult conversation is okay. A lot of those things are some steps that we talk about when we're talking about continuing with healthy relationships and consent within the classroom. At this moment, are there any questions or any other things that we can do in order to continue to center consent within our relationships?
I do have a question around.
Oh,
I do have
go
a
ahead.
sorry about that. I do have a question about what are some ways for parents to check in so that it doesn't feel awkward, especially when you think about teenagers or you think about middle school kids. Do you have any prompts or processes that may be beneficial for parents, whether it's driving in a car or sitting in a living room? I'm just trying to help parents to have those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that I think about is I know we said embracing the awkward, but sometimes embracing that awkward is meeting our students where they are, right? And sometimes those awkward moments can just turn them away from the hard conversations that we're trying to have. And so I like the fact that you brought up the car because I feel like that's a wonderful place, right? On the drive home from school or on the drive to get dinner or something like that, asking those questions like not just how was your day, but how did your day make you feel today? Like, are you tired? Are you drained? How does this work for you? Asking those follow-up questions really provides a space in order for students to feel seen, to feel heard. One thing that I have noticed in the research has also proved over the years is especially when it comes to middle school students, and some of our high school students as well, when it comes to their motivations to even have conversations about healthy relationships. A lot of them don't have these type of conversations, or they're always saying like, "Oh, my day was fine. It is what it is," because they don't feel seen, because they don't feel heard in those situations. And so when we reinforce that they have agency, when we reinforce that it is okay for them to feel all of their feelings, not just the good feelings, but even the feelings that might make us as parents or as adults in their lives uncomfortable, once we teach them that those things are okay, it leads to greater relationships and greater conversations when it comes to those checking in. And so as far as some points, as far as actually checking in with that student, I would say asking those follow-up questions. Sometimes, yes, the day was just fine, it was great, but asking, how did that day make you feel? Or how did this situation make you feel? It like knocks a little door in their head sometimes. And it's like, hey, this person actually wants to know how this thing makes me feel. And in whole, it allows that student to kind of open up and embrace the negative and the positive within that situation because someone is listening to them unpack that in live action.
Mhm. There was a question in the chat about kind of scripts, or not really script, but scripts or ways
Mhm.
for parents to initiate those conversations with their student.
Yeah. So currently we do not have any scripts. That's a great question. That currently we do not have any scripts for this, but I would love to be able to connect with you all after this and see what those scripts can look like. So I definitely believe that that's a resource that we can provide when it comes to being able to have a list of questions or a script that parents can use to have conversations around healthy relationships within their students' lives, right? What does that look like there? That's a very great question. And I definitely think like it would be a great resource. So I will note that and I will be in touch as well. We talked about these three. I wanted to go point out this last one. Knowing that no is not a bad thing when it comes to what we can do to ensure consent within our relationships. Um, some of us were saying earlier, I believe it was Vince or Dr. Jameson about the rejection is not personal, right? So removing the rejection from whatever the situation that it is when we're talking to our students, we're talking to our sons and daughters, right? Talk through the scenarios of honoring boundaries and processing disappointment, right? I feel like that is a very key point when it comes to honoring those boundaries, right? How can I have conversations about consent and about rejection with my child without them feeling the brunt of, oh, I was just rejected. I feel so horrible. This person doesn't like me or whatever. Let's honor the respect that you've shown, right? Let's honor the boundaries that you have practiced and put in place with this person. Ask them questions. Have you put any boundaries in place for this person? You might have been rejected. Yeah, how does that relationship work now? What does that look like now? Is that something that you all can come back from? And then give them options, right? Have you talked to a counselor about it? You can get someone to mediate this conversation. Or have you really talked to them and told them how you feel? Asking those questions and being invested in your students' lives definitely uplifts them and it allows for them to have conversations about consent a lot more easier. And then the last one, talk with them about how they can support their friends.
Mm.
So considering all the ways leads to more fulfilling, respectful, fun relationships and connections. And so we all got this. You have to put that at the end, right? Because these conversations are very difficult. The jobs that we do in general, even if you're a parent, if you're a teacher, administrator, whatever, working with any type of student population, it's a difficult thing to do, right? We have the responsibility of the next generation in our hands, right? And sometimes we have to have those hard conversations. Sometimes we have to have those conversations that we haven't even had yet, right? Sometimes we have to inform ourselves in order to go back and meet our students where they are.
Mm.
So this is just our ending screen here with Safe Connections information about our mission statement, our services that we offer, and our 24/7 crisis helpline. Again, that number is at the bottom of the screen, 314-531-2003. This helpline is available to you all at any time. At this time, I wanted to go ahead and open the floor for any questions or going back and talking about some of those characteristics of healthy relationships. I'm definitely open and down for all of that.
Yeah.
Well, Vince, real quick before you jump in, I just want to say thank you because I was sitting here having a conversation. Like I said, my daughter is here and kind of listening in, and just wanted to say thank you because I think as a parent, you're not necessarily equipped to talk about consent and boundaries,
Mhm.
but I do also feel, being able to provide families with questions to start those conversations would be helpful. So we are more than willing to partner to be able to do that because I'm sitting here thinking to myself, what question might I ask my 14-year-old
Mhm.
to see if he's experienced a situation where he feels as if his boundaries have been violated or that he's been in a situation where he had to
Mm.
decide if consent was needed. So I do think that that will be a great addition to this presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And I would love to work on that resource so we can definitely connect.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. Just a couple of thoughts I wanted to share, and this was
Yes.
super helpful. One is that one of the tricky things about consent is that you can be involved in a relationship with someone that where they give consent to a certain degree, but that you're interpreting that as complete consent for everything. Like they might invite you to come into their dorm room, their apartment to visit after a long night, but that doesn't mean consent to a sexual relationship that evening. So it's
Yeah.
I think there's some real powerful conversations that can take place about consent and kind of the different levels of that, you know,
Mhm.
and also being able to frame for our students and our children about how respecting boundaries and being able to respectfully receive a no can actually deepen your relationship with that person and
Mhm.
sort of like an ironic way because they might feel rejected. But in some ways, if a person says no and you respect it, that actually can deepen your relationship with that person. They feel like affirmed by you. And so
Mhm.
there's a way to kind of reframe that I think is helpful.
Yeah.
And the third thing I wanted to share is the reason why Project Heart is so good when you guys bring it into schools is the crosstalk between the peers in the classroom that's facilitated by your folks is
Mhm.
really powerful because hearing from their peers about consent and how that makes them feel is really the secret sauce. That really is where they really can kind of retain some of that information. To Dr. Jameson's point, you know,
Yes.
Kennedy is the best instructor about consent for for her brother, and I'm not surprised by that because I think peer to peer they can really learn a lot from each other, which is what's really powerful about Project Heart.
Thank you so much for that. Something I did want to point out that you had stated, I believe that it's very important that sometimes, again, we meet students where they are. And so sometimes it's not about just pulling this big pile of like, this is consent and boundaries. This is what you need to know in order to like be safe and do all the things in life, right? Sometimes we have to start with those smaller conversations about respect and consideration within our relationships, right? When we go back and we talk about those characteristics of healthy relationships, and we talk about teaching people how to treat you every single day, then we can kind of get to the nitty gritty and the principle or the bones of the framework of, hey, this is how, I don't want to keep it simple, but this is how you be a good person, right? This is how
Mhm.
you be respectful within your relationships. This is how you ask questions that might be uncomfortable or that might be new to you, right? Starting with respect, starting with consideration, with empathy, with those things, it makes for very communicative type of children. It makes for those conversations, it makes those conversations a little bit easier when we are checking in with that person, where we might have consented to you coming over so we can watch Netflix, and right. And now things are escalating and we need to check back in and make sure that this is still okay because you consented to only one thing, not the whole show, right? And so
Mhm.
sometimes asking those questions and going back and talking to them about what does consideration look like? What does checking in with your partner, with your friends look like when y'all have made a big decision?
Mhm.
Sometimes it's very important to keep consent at the center of those conversations, of course, but sometimes we just have to approach them a little bit differently. So whatever
Mhm.
works for you all. But I wanted to point that out. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This has been extraordinarily enlightening for me. These are the conversations that were never had with me and that I never had with my kids. So I'm personally eager to spread the news that this video resource is available widely to our community. Olivia, Amarion, thank you so much for your expertise. For the benefit of those who are viewing this, it will be found on mrhschools.net. Look under departments. Under departments, there's an entire section for the superintendent, and you will find it there easily. Vince, you have something else to add.
Yeah, just one final word. This is just, hopefully this is just an opportunity to kind of learn a little bit about this topic, but also know that our school counseling team and our social workers are well versed in this topic. And if you have concerns about or questions about this particular topic, how to talk to your kids, how we teach consent in schools, because this is something we do address in some of our health classes, please feel free to reach out to your school counselors at your children's school or their social workers. And I do love the fact that having students practice the idea of consent when they're younger around non-sexual issues can really build some building blocks as they get older. I think that's kind of a brilliant way of thinking about this work. So thank you. Thank you for coming, Safe Connections team.
All right, appreciate that, Vince. Everyone, good health. Good night.